Hi everyone, I'm back. If I'm looking a little weird listing like this, it's because it worked to keep me still so you don't get sick watching me with the blurriness. Alright, I'm back, not very long after the first video where I talked about the nature of FI, and I went and had a really fun time gathering 4 terrific exemplars of major FI at work in Louis C.K.'s comedy, assisted by heavy use of Extroverted INtuition, which I believe to be his auxiliary function. I believe that if Louis C.K. were to do were to look into the Myers-Briggs temperament indicator, that he would identify with INFP. And the contention I make is, I don't think it's very controversial. That there's evidence of heavy FI patterned cognition going on in his case, as well as heavily introverted intuition. So just a few words about those things again, those cognitive functions. Introverted feeling is very heavily subjective. It is self-referential. It is idiosyncratic. It is a system of reckoning for evaluation that is developed in a person somewhat at a remove from the external world. Its focus is inward, being an introverted function. It is, anyway, blah, blah, blah. I just keep going on and on about that. But the point I was going to make, and what these are examples of now, are FI is it can be distinguished from FE in that it is very concerned, and from the other functions, it's very concerned not only with a subjective experience of very deep emotionality that is pretty much ongoing and is consciously felt by the person with the heavy FI influence in their cognitive function stack pretty much all the time. That's a huge thing about it. But it is also FI, a huge part of what FI is preoccupied with cognitively is search for moral truths and a search for, or a doing of moral evaluation of things. It does this all the time. If you have FI in the dominant position, as INFP and ISFP have, or if you have it in the auxiliary position, as ENFP and ESFP have, then your FI is weighing in on things constantly. It's chiming in and it's informing where you should be directing your attention, and it is very much a big lens through which you see the world, through which you experience the world and take in data from it to consider. It's very much about having a point of view. It's about having a very strong sense of self that you just naturally have. It's kind of inborn. It's about understanding and valuing individualism, we naturally heavy FI people, we look at groups as a collection of happily cooperating, we'd hope, individuals, and we have a sense of being, an inborn sense of being kind of separate from the rest of the world. So that's a rundown about some important things with FI and the kinds of questions FI is after. It is seeking to find and to refine its definition of and and to deepen its understanding of questions of value that are extra rational or extra logical. It is concerned with, I guess, basically most of the questions, the moral questions that and the value system-based questions that FI concerns itself with. I guess most of those questions would fall under the umbrella of the big question of, is this worthy? And how things are worthy or not will be defined in a rather a somewhat idiosyncratic way per each person with the heavy FI. But there could be, any number of axes within that kind of evaluation system against which the value is measured of a given phenomenon or proposed action of the individual. So it's about right and wrong. It's about truth and beauty. It's about all kinds of things that do not have to do with a Cartesian logic or a TI-based sort of logic. Now, as mentioned in the other video and elsewhere, FI has a lot in common with how it operates, not in terms of how it operates on the more micro level, but rather certain qualities of the internal systematization of evaluation. Certain general qualities are shared by introverted feeling and introverted thinking, and the idiosyncratic nature of each is there. I don't want to talk about that anymore. Sorry, I want to get to those videos and talk about it. So yeah, I was saying that Louis C.K., what is in evidence in his comedy hugely, it's just all over the place, is he's a kind of everyman moral philosopher in a colloquial sense. And what he will do is use his I believe this is how it works, his extroverted intuition auxiliary function to scan the environment. This is what NE does. Scan the environment, looking for patterns in the objective world, and looking for meaning, and then asking the question, what does this pattern mean? What does it indicate about things in the bigger picture? That's a lot of what NE does, other than invent and prompt one to do a lot of really make really strange connections very far afield with objective phenomena, and see what two things that for most people wouldn't have anything to do with one another, people with heavy NE influence can make a connection, and usually very quickly. We sort of make sometimes almost instantaneous associative webs of meaningful connection between multiple phenomena in the objective world, and we're very, very drawn to looking at that kind of thing. INFPs with that NE in their auxiliary are very drawn to doing that, and they do it quite a lot. Louis C.K. is an example, I believe, of an INFP whose auxiliary is very, very developed. I see him using it in his comedy all the time. Also see the FI. All right, so the first of the 4 clips in the description box. This is one, yeah. Oh God, it's good. This, I know I said this before, so I better watch it with the queen of hyperbole that I am. I really better tone it down. I said that Aurora was the most INFP thing I've ever seen. Well, now I'm gonna have to eat those words a little bit, because here comes an example of some comedy that Louis C.K. does that is, I don't even want to explain it, because every single thing that he says in this clip on the Conan O'Brien show, every single thing is like, it's pure FI. It's pure FI. It's so much so I don't even know what to say. I think it would be stupid to even try and explain it, because it's like, well, if you don't get it, then I don't know. This is what FI is. So he is, and it's FI married to extroverted intuition in his case. So he starts off having a rant about why he hates cell phones and why he thinks kids should not have cell phones. So here we have again, this is what FI does. FI makes qualitative judgments. It renders value judgments. It looks at phenomena, intrapsychic, but also looking at the outside world, and it decides what is a worthy thing to do, what is valuable, what should be done, how should things be. So again, very, very, it asks moral, philosophical questions in the most, sort of simple sense of that. So here he is. He talks about cell phones, all right? So he's got this this is very FI. He's got this opinion that is very, very strong. And this is why he's so funny, and this is why so many NFPs are comics, because, anyway, we do this. It's a great combination for comedy to have the zany, off-the-wall, noticing patterns that other people don't see, making connections in the objective world, which contains all the stuff that everybody has access to, combined with this sort of thoroughgoing moral investigation and philosophizing and asking of questions of what is worthy and what should one do. that FI is preoccupied with. So he talks about this, hating the cell phones, and just watch how he goes from this qualitative rant, but what's wrong with cell phones, then what's wrong with kids, and then within no time, I don't even know what the second count is, he tells an anecdote about day-to-day life. This is also a thing that he does constantly. He's always referencing autobiography. So again, FI, very self-referential. It takes everything personally. It starts with the self. It starts with a profound, careful study over time of the self. And then it finds what in the self is universal. And it works outward from that understanding of the self and the observation of the self. And again, nobody does this like the INFPs do it, because they've got that. They're constantly wondering about the value of things and reckoning in their own minds, like what the value of different things and possible actions are, or things that have happened already. So he goes very, very quickly from this very judgment, moral judgment about, and very subjective, completely subjective and completely unapologetically subjective. And that's another funny thing about it. Like, he knows that it's funny. This is what's very INFP about him rather than ENFP too. He knows that it's funny. He knows that other people are going to think it's kind of nuts, but he's like, it's plain to me that this is the way it is, that this is the value of this thing that's under consideration. And then he makes an argument for it. But of course, it's not a logical argument. It's not logical in the sense of pure logic and syllogism and nothing like that. But it has a kind of logic, meaning it is FI reckoning is very like TI. This is where what it has in common with TI. It's a very systematic and complex reckoning that depends upon an achieved coherency, internal coherency of the system, of the evaluating apparatus. So he takes us through that with the cell phone thing, and in no time he has led us right into profound existential crisis and consideration of that. So again, this is the kind of thing that if you're wondering why, if you have INFPs around you and you're like, why are a bunch of emo, mopey, like, what's the problem? Why are they such a downer? Why do they have to bring everybody down and bring up these questions? It's like, because this is what they're thinking about. They are thinking about moral philosophy all day long, from the time they can cogitate at all, for their whole lives. That's what they're doing. And if you were as idealistic as they are, if you had such an imagination and such a big picture view that auxiliary extroverted intuition would confer, you literally see a big picture view. You're looking at the objective world, you're noticing patterns out there, you're noticing meaningful patterns out there, and you're rendering value judgments about them based on your FI. If you were doing that all the time, the kinds of things you would be contemplating all the time, and then additionally carrying the burden of feeling emotionally very intensely about the whole time you're thinking about them, I think it starts to become very clear why you might be a little depressed sometimes, why you might thoughtlessly, which is hilarious, the irony is just hilarious, it's just amazing, thoughtlessly, bring up touchy subjects, in mixed company. Why? Because that's where you live all the time. That's why you're bringing it up. Not to be rude, not to, but it's not the concern. That's FE's concern. And that's not what FI is supposed to be doing. And obviously that's not what it does that much. Not in a sophisticated instrumental way, but a highly intentional, conscious way that a heavy FE user uses their feeling function to affect what's going on in the current moment in the social environment, in promoting and harmony. there's some, once again, I'm going to have much more to say about this because it was so incredible. I'm just going to make a little side note to Michael Pierce's podcast #1 commentary on the functions that he put up a few days ago. It's great, so great. And there's for what it's worth, I agree with every single thing that he says in there. And he has a section near the end where he talks about some very irritating things that ENFPs he's noticed in particular, with our overwhelming objective bias of our NE married with our tertiary TE, how we can be very, very irritating to INFJs. Anyway, just check the whole thing out. It's really great, and it's really, really educational, and it's inspired. It's wonderful. And he says in there, he talks about how, a feeling that, again, and it's so funny that all these people think he's an INTP, right? Sorry, I'm on a whole other tangent now, guys. He mentions in there multiple times that there are a ton of people in the MBTI community who really think he's an INTP. And I would say to those, and he jokes about that, and he refutes it, and whatever. And I would say to any of those people who are still insisting on that, I'm like, look at his look at the fact that he says that he's not, and that he's frickin' Michael Pierce with what's behind him that's demonstrated about his understanding of Jungian typology and a bunch of other things. And then, if that's not enough to convince you, well, here's a little tiny thing to look at. Look at what he says when he describes what it's like for him to have an ENFP with the NE and the TE to kind of jump onto his, say, an NI TI derived model that he would, he's going to the trouble of trying to share with an ENFP at some point. And immediately, the ENFP is going to start with their bias, objective bias is going to start just critiquing the hell out of it and saying, well, what about this, what about that? And he just provided this wonderful example in the lecture of the idiosyncratic nature of two things: his NF-ness, you'll see this in a second, and also the idiosyncratic nature of both TI and also, it happens, FI. When he says, kind of stampy-footed, he says of this unwanted, kind of interrogation on the part of certain ENFPs of NITI models. He basically is very frustrated, he's upset, and he's, in face of that, very frustrated, and would say, so my model doesn't square up with reality. He's like, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He's like, again, like, you're not getting it. He's like, I don't care. I don't care that there are these huge objective holes in my model where, I don't care that you're coming at me with a shit ton of evidence that I have not, I'm telling you this is the truth I've discovered, and you're poking holes in it and saying, well, what about this and what about this? This doesn't square with this model at all, so how can this be the truth? And it's very irritating, and anyway, it's totally understandable why it would be. It really is. I'll say much more about that another time. Anyway, so that's the thing. TI and FI are idiosyncratic, and they are internally developed, and they are those who work things out using a powerful TI or FI evaluation process. Those people are going to be very attached to their, or quite attached to the conclusions they've arrived at, because they've worked very hard to arrive at those conclusions. And there are a lot of reasons why they would value them and want to defend them, and unless of course they're proven useless, or not sound. More to the point, that's more to the point actually. FI and TI are useless all the time. The issue of those functions is useless quite often. But for the heavy users of those functions who produce these models of moral philosophy or otherwise, they don't care not the whole rest of the world. If the whole rest of the world doesn't agree with them, they still don't care, because the internal coherency and the beautiful elegance of the model itself is what's important. It's more important than the objective world's exigencies.